Good evening, everyone. We are recording this on the day when Russia finally did the most dreaded thing. Russia finally attacked Ukraine, apparently local time, Malaysian time at 8 a.m. Today, 24th of February. So Ukraine is a former Soviet republic, aka it was part of Russia back when Russia was still the USSR. In the 90s, the USSR broke up and Ukraine essentially became an independent state. But why is Russia doing what it's doing to Ukraine? There could be a bigger story behind this, and I believe, Doc, you have it.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to SecurityLah Podcast, Season 2.
Okay, Kat, before we go on, I'd just like to say that on behalf of all the team members and SecurityLah, we are very sorry for the recent turn of events. We humbly and sincerely pray for the safety and well-being of the people who are affected by this conflict. We sincerely hope that this conflict ends as soon as possible,
Yes.
without having any casualties. And we hope those who are staying in those affected areas continue to stay safe. You know, it's really not a nice thing to happen right now. We've been hit by pandemic, and now a full-scale invasion, aka war, aka peacekeeping, or however you want to call it, is going on right now. You know, and that scares me. This episode of SecurityLah is dedicated on the cyber aspects of this particular incident. I mean, it would be understatement to say this is an incident. It's beyond an incident. It's between two countries. So, Kat, taking cue from what you mentioned, you're absolutely right. Ukraine was part of the Soviet Republic, and in the late 90s, the USSR broke up, and Ukraine somewhat had their independence. Just to share with you, geographically, Russia shares the border with Ukraine, the eastern part of Ukraine, with Donetsk and Luhansk. You may be familiar with Donetsk because that was the site near Donetsk, Donbas, where MH17 was shot down with a book missile not too long ago, and I believe 298 lives were lost during that particular incident. So this war or insurgents, or however you want to call it, that's happening right now is something that has been brewing for some time. The downing of a commercial airplane was regrettable, I believe, by all parties, but unfortunately it is part of this conflict, and I believe that the case is still going on in The Hague regarding what happened with that airplane. So back to this. So Russia shares their border with Donetsk and Luhansk, and in around 2014, if I'm not mistaken, Russia did something similar to Crimea, which was another part that was somewhat liberated during the USSR breakup. Since late 2021 and early 2022, actually, if you look at from the time where MH17 was involved, there was already this issue that was brewing between Ukraine, Russia, the separatists, and multiple groups that had their faction. This has been something that's been going on, but is it just a dispute of who should have control? Now, I've been doing some digging and I found out some very interesting things. Just like with all war that we've seen in the past, if you talk about Iraq, Kuwait, there's always that element of oil that's involved. So when I dug in deeper, Russia just finished their Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline. Now, this gas pipeline is meant to supply gas under the Baltic Sea from St. Petersburg in Russia up to Lubmin, Germany. It was completed around September 2021, and Germany, after hearing Russia declaring the independence of Donetsk and Luhansk a few days ago, has decided to say, you know what, stop all this. This pipeline helps to deliver gas straight from Russia to Germany and the rest of Europe, including UK. So why do they have to do that? Because traditionally, the pipeline, the existing pipeline, cuts through Ukraine and then goes to Europe. So because it's cutting through Ukraine, Russia now has to pay somewhere around the region of between 1.2 to $2 billion to Ukraine.
Wow.
Because transit fee, so you pass through Ukraine, okay, I tax you. Otherwise you can't pass. And there has been quarrels relating to charging and billing and how this thing is going through. So the idea of building this new pipeline is to completely bypass Ukraine and to just go straight to Europe. So to give you a bit of perspective of how big or huge this thing is, Russia supplies about 35% of gas imported by EU. And when I say EU, it includes UK. I mean, in this context, we don't assume Brexit first. 31% as pipeline gas and 4% LNG. So you can imagine how much of money that Ukraine is earning right now. So obviously, Russia being the bigger part of that particular continent is going to say, hey, you tiny little fella, you're making money out of me. You used to be part of me, you broke off. So obviously, you can see there's that geopolitical bit and there's also the economic bit that's clashing and has been brewing since with Putin's ambition on
I see. Yeah, that would be a huge motivation to I launch an attack, I suppose, to not have to pay transit fees, which are which from the sound of it is actually very exorbitant.
I mean, imagine saving $2 billion. Wow.
Yeah,
that's a
being
lot
able to save that kind of
money.
money. But at the same time, you know what, Doc, here's what I don't get. Okay, I mean, if one country they deploy military forces and they do the yada yada to physically invade the country and eventually take it over, right? That makes sense. But why is there a cyber version to this war as well?
Okay, I'm gonna get to the cyber bit in a while, but before that, I have to quote this. This was from Putin's speech, which I found really interesting. So the first part, he says, "Dogs will bark, but the caravan will go on," kind of hinting that say whatever you want, this is going to happen. And he clearly mentions that he aims to demilitarize and denazify Ukraine. Now, if my knowledge of the region serves me right, if I'm not mistaken, the president of Ukraine is a Jew. So I'm not sure who's the Nazi in the whole equation. But anyway, all right. He goes on to say that they're going to conduct a special military ops. And he was mentioning that people there were subject to bullying and genocide. So the whole mission is supposedly tagged under peacekeeping by Russia.
Good grief. That's a stretch.
Well, I'm really, really not sure. And the funny bit is the UN Security Council just convened, I think, a day ago. And guess who chaired it?
Okay, someone from Russia?
So I was scratching my head trying to figure out, okay, how is this going to work? But I guess that's enough bit of history lesson into what happened. It's always important that we understand the context because cyber doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's always an extension of what happens in real world. And that's the one thing that I've learned doing cyber threat intelligence. It's always an extension of something physical. So it's never something that's about, just cyber or computer alone. Sorry, Kat, could you repeat that question you had for me just now?
Okay. My question was basically, I get that they physically deploy military forces because they want to physically take over the country. But what's with the cyber version of it, and like having cyber campaigns, to that goes along with the physical war in the real world as well.
Okay, that's a good question. We know today that the military technology is now heavily computerized. And when I mean by technology, it encompasses both computing, navigation, as well as communications. So I'll explain each part. Computing bit is where you understand where your forces are, you plan, and you have visibility, say in your war field. You want to know, say, where the forces are heading, where the enemies are coming from. So you're talking about things like radar system, GPS, geolocation. Funny thing is that folks on the internet, cybersecurity folks, and people who are into open source intelligence were practically tracking government troop movements using Google Maps. And these are civilians. Mind you, we are civilians. We don't have any fancy tech stuff, right? And how did that happen? Very simple. We saw a traffic jam happening at the border of Ukraine. Hello, traffic jam, Ukraine, right? So that kind of tells you two things. How did the traffic jam happen? Number one, a large set of troops being deployed, probably carrying mobile phones, now suddenly appears as, hey, look, I am causing a jam in this road, and probably somebody turned on Waze or Google Maps to say, okay, take left at that small kampong or village down there, So guess what? We are now watching a war live using open source tools. You see how technology plays a part? Now, so I've covered a little bit about computing. What about navigation? If you're deploying missiles, say over a range, you want to make sure that the missile goes and hits the right target. So obviously you use navigational system. Now the military has their own separate set of GPS type system, which is separate from the traditional one, because the traditional one, you can spoof the signals. That's how, if you've closely observed Iraq, you would have seen news about some of the drones being captured. These are what do you call it? Tactical drones. So they're capable of killing people or dropping bombs. And these drones were caught because the attackers were able to spoof your generic GPS signal. So it's like a broadcast kind of a system. So military has a separate set of GPS type positioning system, which is less prone to all these kind of interference. Hence technology. So if you want to shoot a missile somewhere and you want to see, there's a cluster of soldiers here, let me whack them, then you need visibility. Hence, you need computing power, you need to be able to have communications. And last but not least, since I touched on communications, today we talk about long range radio frequencies, and these deploy capabilities like encryption to ensure that no one's listening on that signal, so that they could hear the messages that's happening. They can't decrypt that message. Like for example, in World War, Germany invaded Poland.
What?
Now I have to sit down and reread my World War again. Okay, so we spoke extensively about the Enigma encryption machine, which was about like a typewriter that sends a encrypted message. And the Allies were only able to decrypt it because they were able to get a copy of the machine, or they were able to get the machine and able to decrypt the actual message. So you see how technology is very closely involved in today's warfare. So
and you know what? As you were sharing about how technology is actually playing a role in helping a country, take over another country, it reminded me of that movie that Bruce Willis acted in, Die Hard. I think one of the movies in his long chain of many Die Hard series, right? Series of
Yes.
movies. There was one where there was a hacker involved, and what he wanted to do was actually create chaos in the United States of America, I think, because it was such a long time ago. I can't exactly remember all the details, but yes, the United States was involved. This hacker wanted to create chaos by bringing down the financial system of
Mhm.
that country. So, yeah. But at the same time, also, I was thinking at that time, right? What a convoluted way, to create chaos. Maybe with the ultimate goal of taking over the country. But that was actually some years ago. Right
Mhm.
now, as you talk about how cyber cyber war campaigns and the bad guys are using technology to help them physically invade the country and take it over, I think it's much more direct and more lethal and more impactful.
You are absolutely right. So let's get back into what's actually happening in Ukraine. I think the whole idea about this podcast is we wanted to cover specifically about the cyber aspect of this. I don't know if war is the right word to use, but
Mm.
for a lack of better word, for the context of this discussion and this podcast,
Mm-hmm.
we're going to use the word war. Okay,
Okay.
so whatever that's happening right now. So there were two main prong of attack that was deployed against Ukraine. So the first one was a DDoS attack, a distributed denial of service attack.
Mm-hmm.
So what this attack did was it knocked off the government agencies and the banks offline. So essentially, these are public-facing websites which are open to the internet. And what happened was you have this huge surge of traffic coming from all over the world, and essentially you're overwhelmed by all this traffic that's coming in. So you have all this botnet herders, people who are herding all these bots all over the world, just sending a signal to Ukrainian government websites, banks, financial sector. So essentially, they were overwhelmed with traffic, which is
Mm.
basically disrupting their service. The secondly was that they deployed a class of malware called a data wiper. Now, essentially, data wiper and ransomware has very similar roots. The only thing is the objective is slightly different. So ransomware, as we know, will encrypt your data, your hard drive, whatever data that's in your storage, so that in order for you to retrieve it, you have to pay either in Bitcoin or some sort of cryptocurrency, and you get the key and you are able to decrypt the data. So the objective of ransomware was, okay, I just want to cause a little bit of pain for you, and I make money if you decide to pay me. So
Mm-hmm.
it was more of a business or a for monetary gain type of operations rather than just to wreak havoc. But vipers are completely different. Vipers are just meant to cause utter damage, chaos, and mayhem. So what Viper does is it goes in, it turns your computer into unusable.
Mm.
So in this instant, they have deployed Viper to Ukraine, Latvia, and Lithuania. And the targets include the finance and government contractors. So they're not just going after government agencies, they're also going after the contractors.
Mm.
So you can imagine that how this is going to pan out. The data wiper is detected as win32/killdisk.ncv, and based on ESET, they saw this deployed to hundreds of devices in the Ukrainian network today. And they note that this particular malware was compiled on 28 December 2021, not too long ago, which indicates that they had this plan. So cyber attacks usually happen way before kinetic attacks. Kinetic attacks means physical attacks or
Mm-hmm.
physical war where you have invasion.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Very simple. When you launch a cyber campaign, nobody's going to take sanction against you. It's not a
Mm.
war per se, right?
Oh,
It's just nation states attacking infrastructure.
I
And
see.
attacks against Ukraine by Russia has been going on for years. it's nothing new. So it's like a war. It's like a cyber war zone in Ukraine almost every other day.
Okay, but what's the end game? Why?
The
Why?
end game is obviously to destabilize the country so that you can eventually take over. But again, according to Russia, they're liberating Ukraine from rebels. And, if you look at everybody's perspective, everyone has a view of how things are. And this particular, so going back on this particular wiper, it's quite interesting because this wiper uses a third-party software driver. So this third-party software driver is the EASUS data recovery, ESUS data recovery and disk management software. So what this software does is it allows you to manage the way your hard drive is segmented. So your hard drive, when you first install Windows or whatever your favorite operating system is, will first slice it into different parts, or they call it partitions. So the partitions is where you place your drive. So for example, your primary partition will be C drive, your secondary partition will be D drive, and then if you want, you can have additional partitions. So what happened was this particular malware uses this driver, which is a legitimate driver, and then it goes and messes up and corrupts your partition as well as your data in the hard drive. So what it does is it's essentially not just messing up with your data, it's truly making it unreadable. Because the way your computer works is your files are stored in the hard drive. But how does the computer know where the file is in your hard drive, right? It can be because your drive may have multiple platters. If you're using SSD, different parts of the drive. So how do you know where it is? That's where the partition actually has an index that tells you this particular file is in this particular location. So without that index, you have all these files, but you don't know where it is. That's why you have tools like, for example, the one thing that I usually share with people is that deleting a file may not necessarily remove it, because a lot of the tools, they're a bit lazy. So what they do is they just remove the first character of the file name in the partition. So which means that the way the operating system sees is that if the first character is empty or null, it says this is not a legitimate file, it's going to skip it.
Okay.
So but the file is still there.
Yeah, but this malware, it's called wiper, right? It's totally removing it and effectively rendering the system or the computer, or whatever it is, unusable.
Enjoying the show so far? Subscribe now so that you don't miss out on the latest episode. We are available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and many other platforms. Visit podcast.securitylah.asia to get the links to subscribe.
Yes. And it's not just one wiper. It seems there were two wipers that were deployed. And the second one was also in the Ukrainian networks in the last 2 months.
Okay.
So the first one was the first data wiper that was launched was called Whispergate. But unfortunately, the malware seemed to mimic a ransomware attack rather than actual a wiper, but it's actually a wiper.
Okay.
Unfortunately, based on the early reports, the ransomware didn't work that well. There were some issues with that particular ransomware. So they released a patched or an update to the wiper, which was then, is just pure malicious.
Okay, you know what, Doc? Is the way you are lovingly describing these two wipers, right?
Lovingly, yeah.
Yeah, you go into so much detail about each of them, right? But this is the first time I'm hearing about them. Do they appear often? Wipers?
Wipers are deployed by threat actors, and what I mean by threat actors are people who are doing malicious stuff. They are deployed as a means for them to wipe out systems. And the reason why they do that is, number one, they don't want to leave any trace of that behind. But traditionally, what most attackers would do is that pretend the Viper to be a ransomware and send it out. Because if it's a ransomware attack, everybody's going to overlook whatever else that has happened.
I see.
So imagine if I'm an attacker, all right?
Mhm.
I hack into just say your organization. I now have unfettered access into all the systems. I've taken all the files necessary, and I have backdoor into practically any system I want. But here's the thing. Now I've come to the point where I said, you know what? I've achieved my actions on objective. That means I've achieved my objectives. So I no longer need access to this practically useless environment. How do I leave this environment without being detected? So the best thing to do is, okay, lah, I launch a ransomware attack, and everybody's going to go helter-skelter, and everybody's going to overlook the part where there was actually a hack that happened. People have stolen data, illegal access. My tools will all also get removed automatically. So it's like me going into machine by machine formatting it. But in this case, what I'm doing is I'm rendering all the data useless. So you can't recover it. You can't see anything. You can't get any artifacts out of the system. You can't see any logs. So essentially, whatever attacks that was recorded in the logs in the system or in your log management system all gets wiped out.
It covers its tracks.
Exactly.
So that forensics can't happen? I mean, really? Is it possible that even cyber forensics will not be able to do anything to retrieve the data, to help it to identify?
So here's the issue. What Viper does is it also does what a ransomware does, which is essentially rendering the file useless through encryption or any other means. So the easiest way is, number one, I encrypt the file. That means the encryption goes on in the file system. And then what I do is then I render the partition or the file allocation table or the NTFS table practically unreadable. So you cannot restore the system back. So the only reprieve any organizations have at this point of time is if you have a backup of that particular desktop, then you can just restore it. But here's the problem with backups and attacks. You really need to know at what point the attack started, because otherwise, when you restore, you're going to restore the malware as well. So here's the situation where I've been in incident response in an organization where they had a huge ransomware attack, and it took out the whole organization. And now we are at the stage where there's practically no data. And what we did was we restored the machines. The IT had already started restoring the machines, and within 2 days, all the machines that were restored got wiped again. So then we found a very useful artifact that we can actually now analyze, because a portion of the malware is actually inside the backup. So that became something that was advantageous to us. So we were able to load it, retrieve it, do some analysis, pull the binaries, find out what it is, and then recreate what they called as a gold disk or the golden image. The golden image is the image that they use to deploy to all the machines. Then restore back the environment. So here's the thing. Backups are good, but at some point of time, you need to know if the backup is the last known good backup that you can rely on. Otherwise, it's going to go on a cycle again.
Yep. You mentioned earlier, right, that Russia has been attacking Ukraine and maybe vice versa as well. I'm not sure. For the longest time, right? Cyber attacks. They've been cyber attacking each other. But in this, do you see any new kinds of methods being used or new kinds of attacking tools?
The tools like the Viper are recent. But here's the thing. When an attacker actually launches an attack, they will do whatever they can to ensure that whatever artifacts that's left in the system. So for example, if I'm planting a malware, I know someone from incident response is going to retrieve that malware and going to analyze it. So I do methods like obfuscation to ensure that if you look at the binaries of my code, you see gibberish. You don't understand how it works. In this case, they didn't bother.
Oh dear.
They were like, you know what? Go ahead. I know you're going to do it. I'm still going to wipe. So it's like blatant, out in the open. Here I am. Do whatever you can.
Does it make it easy to identify them as well? Yeah, they're not trying to
Yes.
hide themselves. Yeah.
Yes. So the good thing is we were able to see the attribution based on code similarities of what has been deployed before. So we can actually map it back against, these were the malware before. So the earlier malware was WhisperGate. So these codes are shared between WhisperGate and the current data wiper, which is the hermetic, hold on, I forgot what's the name.
Yes, it's hermetic. Yeah.
Yeah, it's hermetic wiper. So we could actually see the similarities in the code and how the code base was shared, which makes the attribution bit much easier. Because once you can attribute to a certain attacker, it's easier to track what they're going to do, because they would share similar things. Like, for example, they will phone home to the same servers, or they may be using similar infrastructure, similar commands. Hence, it's easier to maybe even diffuse that particular piece of malware rather than just leaving it running dry.
Which would you say is more lethal?
On which one? Sorry.
The wipers. Which would you say is more lethal, WhisperGate or hermetic? Because the hermetic one, if I'm reading this correctly, it's totally new. It was totally introduced into this world just today.
Yes.
Like 17 hours ago only, just as Russia attacked Ukraine.
Yes.
What's
the preparation was done in December. So they've had it ready. So they've had the code base ready. They launched the first one. Didn't quite work out the way they wanted to. So now they're like, okay, we're going all out, guys. Throw everything you have, including the kitchen sink, and let's see what happens.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So they've gone all out. And this time they're just not bothered about it. They'll be like, don't even bother, encrypting your binaries and all that. Just let it go.
Okay. So they launched an earlier version and then they improved on it, and it was like on a wider scale. I mean, they deployed it on a wider scale this time around.
Yes. So what's the lesson for defenders in this point of view? So the first thing is a determined attacker may just change the approach when he or she or they or the group gets discovered, right? So in this case, it's an all-out war. It's public. But in most situations, you're not going to see this kind of scale or attack. I mean, of course, if you're a country like Ukraine and you're defending your networks, so this is where good practices has to be there. I believe I was reading a news, and they were saying that it was unfortunate that Ukraine was using non-legitimate version of a particular brand software prevalently in their networks, and that also contributed to more issues in the whole thing. So original software, you get updates, you solve a lot of issues. Non-original software or software that's obtained through whichever suspicious means, you may not get your updates. Hence, it is more vulnerable into a vulnerability or a bug that may affect your system. So that's also compounding the issue.
Yeah. So despite this being a nation-state attack, right? At the end of the day, this wiper is a malicious malware, like any other malicious malware, but of course with bigger impact and nastier impact. But the way to prevent it would have been, at the end of the day, just good basic cyber hygiene.
Yes and no.
Oh.
At this point, you are dealing with an all-out, determined attacker. I agree with your point. The basic cyber hygienes will help.
To an extent.
No doubt about it.
Okay.
Right? It will increase the difficulty of an attacker coming in.
Okay.
But to completely say that if you only have hygienes, you're safe, that's untrue.
Okay, fair enough.
In this case, in this particular scenario, you have to have your baselines met, but you have to go up and beyond whatever you're doing. So it's not just enough for you to say, yeah, we have our baselines, good enough. right? You have to do a lot more things. You need to be able to know what's happening at the machine level. If someone is running a particular command, your SOC, Security Operations Center, should be able to know, hey, somebody's running this particular command. This doesn't look usual. That level of intelligence has to be there. Where
Okay.
someone is actually monitoring 24/7, you know what's happening. There's a lot of controls that you should have in place that you probably will not see in an average organization.
I would love to know, Doc. Just now you mentioned there has to be some level of intelligence to be able to detect that something was wrong. Would you, in this particular case, would it be old-fashioned eyeball technology or artificial or AI-based kind of software, which is all out there in the market today?
It's a mix of both.
Okay.
The bulk of the usual attacks, you don't really even need AI. Basic stuff, you can already be able to detect it. It will flag it and say, hey, this is most likely malicious. If you see, in this case, we're talking about nation states, very determined hackers, very sophisticated. They probably use techniques that are meant to evade detection. So, for example, there's a method called using living off the land, LOL bins. Essentially, what that is that instead of me downloading a tool, for example, if I have a tool called a downloader, it's a small exe file. When you double click it, it will download the actual malware. So usually when you get to a phishing attack or whatever, you will usually download the downloader first, and then it will download the actual payload or the actual malware. But here in this case, a determined hacker would say, if I do that, they will know I'm running a tool that is not part of the system. So your application whitelisting will say that, hey, I cannot run this. But what if I run a tool that's already part of the system, that is built by Microsoft, that Microsoft says this is a legitimate tool in the system? So for example, there's a tool called CertUtil, which is a tool that's used to manage digital certificates, X509 certificates. You can use that tool to download a file from the internet if you know what are the parameters. So if the SOC analyst looks at this log and says, somebody's running cert2, okay, basic tool, part of Windows, nothing to worry about.
Okay.
But if you look at the parameters that's applied, you see the URL, you see something else, then you know, something is wrong. This shouldn't be run.
Okay.
So then you have better idea as to what's happening to the system. That's why I said it depends on who are you protecting your system against.
Okay.
That's why I said for this instance, it's going to be very difficult.
Okay. So another way that they can evade detection also is to compromise the security tools, the tools which are apparently supposed to help.
You are absolutely right. For years, I've been saying this. Security tools can and will create vulnerabilities. And if you look at the debate that we had not too long ago, a few of the tools actually had quite serious vulnerabilities that was rated above 8 on the CVE score. So yes, and in this particular wiper, a lot of thought has been put into place to make it deadly. So one of the functions that this wiper has is that this wiper is targeting Windows systems. So Windows has a functionality called shadow copy. So what shadow copy does is it creates a backup of your system just in case if anybody messes around or mucks around with the system and causes it to become unusable. This tool goes in and carefully disables volume shadow copy, which means it's, in a way, it's advanced. That means they know exactly what the system does, and they've put in all the measures to counteract against whatever the operating system is trying to do. So which means causing real permanent damage, which leads to chaos and mayhem.
Gosh, scary.
Yeah. I mean, facing one of these machines that's been wrecked by this wiper is going to be a challenge trying to discover and actually manage.
I'm out of questions.
Yeah, there's just so much that's happening right now,
Yeah.
and this is just in essence, this is just the beginning of the conflict, and I believe this is going to develop even more. In fact, the security community has been so busy analyzing all these tools and trying to put out as much information as they possibly can to defenders, so that they could better protect their systems.
How do you see
So,
this escalating? Actually, I'm curious to know your point of view.
to be honest, I hope it doesn't escalate. I
But if
hope
it does,
if it does, it's just going to be all hell
hypothetical.
breaks loose. No holds barred. I don't think any of the attackers are going to be what do you call that, subtle in their approach.
Okay,
It
that's
is
all to
just
be
going to
known
be
already.
all out chaos and mayhem, like what I keep repeating. It's just going to be chaos and mayhem, and I'm just keeping an eye on this to see what's happening.
Okay, and a whole bunch of hacking tools and hacking methods being thrown into the mix.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's a challenge for the defenders, because you're now facing an attacker real time, and you've been targeted and they are coming after you. Whereas for an organization, say somewhere in Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, or even Thailand, there's no supposedly target. So the defenders can, take a breather, like what happened in Singapore and the OCBC incident. So the reality of the situation is that today, while you may be going to bed in a short while, attacks are happening. They are happening, and they are here. So it's important to have your guards up. That's the problem with being in cybersecurity, or even being in SOC. You can never let your guards down, because you'll never know when that attack is coming in. I mean, like, this is obviously blatant. Yeah, we're having a war and I'm coming all out for you. So that's going to happen. But in a normal organization, in normal circumstances, like times of peace, we shall call it, just say like countries that I mentioned earlier, do you look for this? Probably. But it's a good thing to actually have all these IOCs implemented in your security infrastructure, just in case. Because in a war, you'll always have casualties of war. Bystanders may be hurt, unfortunate, but they're just part and parcel of the whole thing. So imagine any one of these tools accidentally escapes beyond that conflict region, and it starts consuming or starts whacking into other infrastructure. So just because you're in another continent doesn't mean you're safe. Someone makes a programming error and says include all languages except for Russia, then mayhem starts everywhere else. So it's not just a cyber war at that particular two countries, but it's definitely going to spill over. We've seen that with NotPetya and Bad Rabbit. So it's going to be all over again.
Yeah, I like the way you described how if the tools are released and it goes beyond the countries that are involved right now. It's as though like wild animals being set on the loose.
Yeah, because there's no guarantee, right? You're going to have people who are, okay, in this particular case, you may have people who are in Ukraine, who are from Ukraine, who's now maybe settling down in US or in other parts of the country, or even in Singapore.
Oh yeah.
Right? Who may have access to systems in Ukraine.
Oh yeah.
And imagine if the malware moves laterally, looks at all the other systems and their disks, it's and one way malwares identify which machines to infect is that they look at what is the supported keyboard or language, and then they spread. But if someone makes a programming error at the wiper itself, then you're looking at a worldwide chaos, cyber chaos, not just a war that's limited to two countries.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that perspective. I've forgotten about the language element as well.
Yeah, because that's how they limit. So there was a joke that's going around the security community that says that if you don't want to be attacked, make sure you install Chinese, Russian, and a few other languages just to keep your computer safe, because they say, okay, got Russian
Good
language
idea,
here,
I think.
so we shall not attack this innocent little computer. So I don't know how effective it is, but some people have recommended that as a countermeasure. So we'll just have to wait and see.
Okay. I think we had a great discussion, Doc. I asked a lot of questions and you helpfully supplied the answers, which were very informative. Yeah.
Yeah, it was important that we get some of this information out, because there are defenders in all over the world that could use these kind of information, understand what's happening,
Yes.
understand the whole situation as it develops. And while we pride at being a pan-Asian cybersecurity podcast, this issue is something that we cannot say will never ever come to Asia, because we are very, very close. And it's a matter of time before this thing may even escalate out of the conflict areas and spill over the world. So it's something that we really have to look out and keep an eye on.
So everybody take note, especially if you're a cyber defender. Listen to this podcast episode and take heart with Doc's observations and recommendations. If you have any questions and want to know more, get in touch with us.
All right, great. If there's something that you'd like to hear more, get in touch with us. You can reach us via our email, info@securitylah.asia. And we're happy to take in feedbacks, comments, and we'll put it into an episode very soon.
Yeah.
All right. So with that said, thank you for listening and have a good evening.
Good evening, everyone.
Thanks for joining us this week on SecurityLah. Make sure to visit our website at securitylah.asia, where you can subscribe to the show in iTunes, Spotify, or via RSS, so you'll never miss a show.